Good afternoon. My name is Richard Williams. I'm a Senior Policy Executive at the SRA, and welcome to our Continuing Competence webinar.
And good afternoon. I'm Mary Costello, Education Researcher at the SRA.
The purpose of today's webinar is really to talk through our proposals to reform current CPD requirements and regulations. We have a consultation out at the moment, and we'll be running through a number of slides which really kind of bring alive the options that we're currently considering. In terms of the running order of today's webinar, obviously we'll start with a fairly broad introduction and then look at the proposals, a very high-level outline of the expected timescales, how you can be involved in the consultation, and we'll then spend a proportion of the time answering any questions you may raise. At this stage, I'd really like to encourage you to submit as many questions as possible, please. You will see where on your screen where you can submit those questions, so please do submit them throughout the webinar. They will be picked up by myself and Mary, and we'll do our best to answer any of those questions. If we don't get around to answering your specific question, we'll take those away with us because they will be particularly useful in determining how we take forward any of the proposals, and we'll get a response to you in due course. A couple of other points before we start. If you have any technical difficulties, there's a technical support button which you can press, and on pressing that button there will be someone there to help you with the issue that you've got. At the point where the webinar finishes, we will provide the CPD code for today's event, and also at this stage, when the webinar finishes, I'd really encourage you to fill in the exit survey. We're really keen to know your thoughts about today's webinar, and please feel free to make any suggestions as to topics within the regulatory environment we could cover in future webinars. So in terms of setting some context in relation to our proposals and the consultation in particular, I thought it might be quite useful just to give an overview as to where it comes from, and there are really two key drivers behind this. Firstly is our Training for Tomorrow policy statement. This policy statement, released in autumn last year, is available on our website in the T4T area. What the Training for Tomorrow policy statement does is really respond to the Legal and Education Training Review. The policy statement contains three broad policy areas and subsequent work involved with that. The first is really to move away from a system where we prescribe pathways to qualification to one which focuses on the outcomes to be achieved through education and training. What that actually means is that we're in the process of developing a competence statement, and the competence statement will define what a good solicitor looks like. We think it's an absolutely critical piece of work for us as a regulator. Work on this is happening, and we expect to go out to consultation on the competence statement towards the back end of this year. The competence statement is also, I suppose, a critical piece of work in terms of linking competence to ongoing competence, and we would expect that this competence statement plays a role for firms and individuals in terms of their ensuring their ongoing competence in terms of some of the options we're going to talk about today. The second piece of work is really our regulations review, and that involves stripping away any technical regulations which require unnecessary SRA involvement. This is removing duplication and also removing any regulations that might be picked up elsewhere within our regulatory framework. We did have a consultation on that. That's recently closed, and we're in the process of analysing consultation responses. So the third key strand of the Training for Tomorrow work is what we're going to talk about today, and that's really reforming our current regulatory requirements around continuing professional development. The other driver in terms of proposing a series of options for reform is that we've kind of undertaken our own internal analysis. We think there are some sort of weaknesses with the current approach to CPD. The first point really on that slide is that there have been no significant changes to the CPD requirements since 1985. In that time, the legal services market, the way in which services are delivered, and particularly who delivers them, has changed substantially. So we feel now is a real time for review. The current CPD approach is based on an input rather than outcome measures. The critical point for us really is that 16 hours is really a fairly arbitrary measure for determining competence. We think the discussion should be really reframed around actually the outcomes achieved in terms of any learning and development undertaken, rather than looking at a prescription in terms of hours as a proxy for competence. We also feel from the work that we've undertaken that the current approach is over-prescriptive and inflexible. Firms know their solicitors and individuals know their own strengths and weaknesses better than the SRA. We feel it's really up to the firms and individuals themselves to take some responsibility and ownership in terms of ensuring that they deliver competent legal services. And in doing so, there is really no place for the regulator in prescribing an approach to doing so. A current weakness of the scheme is also that really it encourages a focus on compliance rather than on the benefits derived from training and development. The 16-hour requirement, it can be argued, really just drives regulatory compliance rather than firms or individuals considering the value of the learning and development they are undertaking and how this relates to the services that they are delivering and the quality of those services. It almost becomes, as was mentioned on the previous slide, a tick box exercise. There isn't often a link between the training that individuals take, their role, and how those relate to delivering competent legal services. So, there are, from our perspective, a few weaknesses with the current approach. We are in the process of consultation, and the consultation is live. The consultation document we released in February really did make it very clear our preferred option, and we'll come on to talk about the options in a little bit more detail over the next few slides, but we were quite clear that option one was our preferred option. I just wanted to spend a couple of moments just talking through why we came to that conclusion. At the moment, we feel that option one is outcomes focused and risk based. It aligns with our strategic position as a regulator, that being we are outcomes focused and risk based. It provides firms and individuals the opportunity to sort of determine how they go about achieving the regulatory objectives we set, rather than us prescribing it. And it allows us to target our resources where we may believe there are risks in terms of continuing professional development. Again, in terms of option one, we prefer it because I think it reframes the debate away from compliance, i.e. meeting 16 hours with minimal regard to the way in which that's achieved, to thinking through what training and development is required within firms and by individuals to ensure that they deliver competent legal services. And again, that is very much a key interest for us as a public interest regulator. And linked to both those points is that actually, we believe firms and individuals are best placed to determine what learning and development they need in alignment with their business models, and they should have the flexibility, the freedom, and the innovation in order to choose from a vast array of methods how individuals go about ensuring their ongoing continuing professional development. So we've got a poll question here for you. We just wanted, before we sort of go into the options, to get a flavour of how many have you actually read the consultation document. So in terms of the outcome of that, it seems that there's a slightly larger percentage. 60% of you haven't read the consultation document. So I think by that we can infer that you hopefully will find today's webinar incredibly useful in terms of setting out some of the options. So the next few slides really just provide an overview, a condensed overview of the detail that is in the consultation document. The consultation document itself is available in the consultations section of the SRA website. So option 1, this can be described as a rigorous and flexible entity-based option. It removes the requirement to undertake mandatory CPD and very much focuses regulatory obligation and requirement on existing requirements in the SRA handbook and code of conduct. And as you see there, Principle 5 and Outcome 1.5 really would be our regulatory hooks in terms of individuals and firms in making sure that both undertake ongoing learning and development to ensure they deliver competent legal services. We will issue non-mandatory guidance for entities and individuals to support them in thinking how they can go about planning, identifying, planning, and reflecting on practice to ensure that there are a competent legal service is delivered. Option 1, and if we did implement option 1, would involve non-prescription around the number of hours of CPD or types of activity. So essentially, we would remove the requirement to undertake 16 hours of CPD. In terms of monitoring and ensuring compliance with this would really be very much integrated into existing risk and supervision functions. If we were to implement option 1, we'd provide more details on this. However, we would very much it would very much link to our existing regulatory architecture. Option 1 would also remove the requirement for the annual CPD declaration by solicitors, and it would also remove the need for the SRA to authorise CPD training providers. I think the critical point with option 1 that it isn't really around the SRA coming out of the space in terms of regulating continuing professional development. We would still be very much interested in individual firms undertaking learning and development. However, it would really be for the firm and individual to determine how they would go about that in order to, and as the previous slide shows, in order to meet the existing provisions in the Code of Conduct and Handbook. So, another question for you. If we were to implement option 1, would there be any operational impacts on your organisation? Again, in terms of the responses to that question, fairly even. 57% of you responded would suggest there would actually be an operational impact in terms of moving towards an approach as outlined in option 1. In terms of option 2, this can be described as an outcomes-focused but one-size-fits-all approach. Within this option, we would retain the mandatory requirement to undertake CPD. However, we've removed the minimum CPD hours requirement. Option 2 really would strengthen the responsibility for solicitors to undertake planning, implement and reflect on their learning annually. And obviously a product of this process would be a reflective log, so it would become a regulatory obligation for solicitors to keep a reflective log of the learning and development they've undertaken over the course of a year. This approach really from the SRA's perspective, would really be about monitoring compliance with the regulation rather than looking at whether competent legal services are being delivered. Option 2 would remove the requirement for the annual CPD declaration by solicitors, and in line with the reflective log approach, would remove the need for the SRA to authorise CPD training providers. So that's a brief overview of option 2. In terms of the third option we've specified in the consultation document, this one is, I suppose, more aligned, more in line with the current approach to CPD that we currently have. And option 2 is very much around the hours-based approach, focusing on compliance in meeting our regulations rather than on whether or not learning and development led to competent legal services. This particular approach would retain the mandatory requirement to undertake CPD. It would prescribe a minimum CPD hours requirement. It would require CPD activity to relate to an individual's current or anticipated area of practice. It would allow for a wider range of activities to count towards CPD. It would focus on, again, monitoring compliance rather than competence, and it would remove regulatory arrangements for annual CP declaration. So that gives you a flavour of, if implemented, how option 3 would look and would plan out. Okay. In terms of the consultation, as an exercise and a process of engagement, we've undertaken a wide range of stakeholder engagement to understand the challenges and understand the benefits of implementing each of these options. This slide just provides a very brief overview of some of the work that we have undertaken as part of gathering and capturing data to enable us to develop whichever option we consider requires implementation after the close of the consultation period. What happens next? The consultation closes on the 2nd of April. We will then require a period of time in order to analyse the responses to those consultations and come up with and determine a policy position. We would clearly then publish a formal SRA response to the consultation, and then we'll engage in the process of developing any new scheme based on the response to the consultation. In terms of timescales, we've been fairly broad within the consultation document and not really specified when we see an implementation date. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One being that obviously we didn't want to sort of preempt the outcome of the consultation. We wanted to analyse and take into account every view and every response we received through the consultation exercise, but also from the wider stakeholder engagement. And then we need to kind of have a look at those responses and you kind of come up with a decision on terms of which of the potential options is the most viable moving forward. So we really are very, very keen to hear your thoughts and your views on the options that we've presented, or any other thoughts or opinions you may have on CPD in relation to the consultation more generally. You can access the consultation document on the SRA website in the consultation section. I think it's about the third document down. You can send your consultation responses to the email address there, which is trainingconsultations@sra.org.uk. We can send a hard copy in to us. Our contact address is available on our website. We've delivered 5 roadshows across the country, and they've been absolutely invaluable in terms of generating views and opinions. so we'll be taking on board those comments. You can respond today in terms of some of the thoughts you may well have in putting forward any comments through this webinar, or you can email us at t4t@sra.org.uk or tweet us at SRA_T4T, and we have a kind of a policy team here waiting to pick up your responses. So we're coming to the end, towards the end of the presentation now, and as part of our approach to stakeholder engagement, we'd really kind of like to understand the type of people that participate in our webinars. So we have another question for you with a number of options in terms of, I suppose, broadly categorising who you may well be. So we'd really appreciate you spending some time to answer this particular question. Okay, that's incredibly interesting from our perspective. You should be able to see the results now in terms of who is actually participating in this particular webinar. So we've come to the end of the presentation regarding the three options now. We're going to take a very short break because we've got a number of questions that you've submitted. So we just need to have a quick look through those, give them some priority, and sort of formulate some very quick answers. So there'll be a short break for sort of 2 or 3 minutes. If, again, we don't get round to answering your specific question, we will take those questions away with us, and we'll make sure that we publish a response to those respond to any questions that you may have asked. So we'll take a short break now and rejoin you in a few moments.
Okay, I've had a few questions around what does mandatory guidance, non-mandatory guidance look like. So that's something we're working on at the moment, in that we're trying to get some empirical evidence about what different firms of different sizes, different types of practice are doing. So we're doing some research with entities. We're doing a survey with 750 firms to find out what do you do, what works well for you, what are the good practice points. So then we'll analyse the evidence from that and also do some in-depth qualitative best practice case studies. Then we can get that spread and then use that to provide examples of what works for different people, why, and then people can see how that can be adapted, applied to their practice, building on what's there already, basically. It's not about looking at people reinventing what they're doing, but looking at what's there and how it can build on what's been developed and working well in different practices that have been shown to be effective already. Okay.
There's been a number of questions asking for a little bit more detail around timing and particular timing of implementation. Obviously, we are in a consultation exercise, so it's very difficult to kind of give specific dates for when we would implement any new scheme. I think it's worth pointing out that, particularly in relation to the wider stakeholder engagement we've done and emerging themes from the consultation responses received so far, is that one of the biggest issues around moving to any of the options we propose really is that this will require significant cultural change for a vast majority of the profession, and that plays out at the firm level as well as an individual level. There will be, of course, some firms and some solicitors who have very sophisticated learning and development systems in place that far exceed current regulation requirements. However, the general sort of sense that we're getting is that to move to any of the options will require and to do it well will require a cultural change across the profession, and that's something obviously we're very, very keen to sort of understand, to listen to, because obviously we will need the buy-in of our profession, those who regulate, to make sure that any of these options are implemented. So I mean, there's a broad ballpark figure, and again, this comes with the caveat the consultation exercise isn't particularly hasn't been closed yet. Is that we would imagine that a new approach to CPD would be in place for the CPD year beginning November 2015. We've also had some other questions for a bit more detail about a reflective log. Reflective log is a requirement under option 2, and what that log would look like would, we haven't really taken a particular view on that. It would, however, be a document of some sort that enables a solicitor to capture the planning capture the identification of any learning and development they need to undertake, the planning of how they intend to address it, and how any work that they've undertaken, reflecting back on it in terms of how that work has supported the role that they've undertaken. So again, broadly, that's the sort of ingredients that we would expect to see in a reflective log.
There's some questions as well about the competence statement that we'll be using as part of whatever option is adopted, and the timings for that. So we're currently working on that. There's a whole process in place to make sure it is being informed by practice, by practitioners. So we've had a series of workshops with different practitioners in different firms and different levels, and have been taking part in an iterative process there. We've now got a draft statement that we're going to take out and test quantitatively with 1,000 practitioners. So you may be getting an invitation to take part in that because we're looking at a representative sample there. So that will then help us refine it further, and then we'll work on that some more, and then there'll be a consultation in September, that's when it'll go out to everybody to have a look and comment on, and from there, that's when we'll look at our implementation timetable for that.
Okay, there's a couple of questions that respond to specific circumstances, those people who practice abroad and those with dual qualifications, and how they stand within each of the particular options. In terms of option 1, our preferred option, essentially it provides individuals with a great degree of flexibility. It is up to the individual to determine exactly what needs they may have in terms of learning and development, how they go about addressing them, and how they reflect back on that training undertaken. Under option 1, that could take a vast range of formats. So I think the key message is that option 1 really does afford the individual solicitor and the firm the freedom, the flexibility, and to put in place measures which they see fit for their particular business. There's a couple of questions today regarding whether or not the webinar is a basis for voting on each of the options. We apologise if we've given that impression, but unfortunately it's not. The purpose of the webinar was to provide an overview of each of the options in the consultation document, and what the implementation of each of those options could well look like. So unfortunately no kind of X factors voting style today. A couple of questions regarding stakeholder engagement and the number of large firms or large in-house departments. We've given a lot of time, thought and consideration to how we plan out our strategic stakeholder engagement for the whole of the T4T programme, and in taking forward this consultation, again, we've been very structured about it. We've met with a large proportion of firms that we regulate, either through roadshows that we've delivered, or through bespoke meetings, or through meetings with learning and development parts of organisations. We've also run a series of workshops with in-house providers. So we've tried to really capture a very mixed range of views from across the entire profession, and within those views, we have picked up the views of in-house solicitors and the views of all firms, really, large, small, and sole practitioners. Just to clarify a point that I've made around timings, we are in the throes of a consultation exercise, so it is very difficult without us robustly analysing every consultation response, as we will do, to then provide a implementation or launch date of any new approach to CPD. The consultation document outlines at the moment really sort of, I suppose, is as definitive as we can get at the moment, and that states that we'd be looking to introduce any new approach at the start of a CPD year. So in terms of work going forward, obviously we'll need to analyse the responses and think about how that looks from an implementation perspective. But clearly, as part of our overall stakeholder engagement, communicating changes, particularly given the required scale of cultural change required, we're hearing from those that we regulate, we will be giving firms and individuals as a longer lead-in time to make any changes as possible. We're probably looking at around June for the publication of our response to the consultation and any proposed timeline for implementation. So I hope that clarifies that point. We're just kind of running through some of the other questions there, so just bear with us. A question that's coming on is around the quality impact assessment work we'll be undertaking in terms of some of our proposals. This is obviously underpins all of our policy development work in terms of each of the options. We are obviously will be analysing each of the consultation responses. We are running a specific equality workshop with representative groups from across the profession later on this month, where we'll be talking through the options and really getting them to think through if there are any equality impacts in terms of any of our options under consideration. We'll be undertaking a full equality impact assessment, as well as part of determining what option we go with, and this will be publicly available before our board takes a final decision on the option for implementation.
Okay, we've had a question as well about the analysis that we've undertaken looking at other professions and how they've been addressing CPD, and so we've taken quite a lot, actually gone out and spoken to quite a few of the regulators, and also looked at their online materials, that sort of thing. So things that we've been looking at are the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. They don't have an hour-based system. That's all left to the individual to sort out and make a declaration at the end that they've carried out their CPD. Also, that GMC doesn't set an hours requirement for any doctors there. So we do note that colleges will have their own, but it's not mandatory for doctors to be part of a Royal College. So the GMC has moved away from that as well, as have the architects, and also a collection of health professions. They don't set hours either. So we've looked at quite a lot of different systems, and a lot are moving away from inputs-based measures and moving to outcomes-based reflective practice for practitioners to take.
A number of you are asking questions around, in particular, option one and how we would ensure that firms and individuals do still pay due regard to learning, development and training to ensure they provide quality and competent legal services. Well, option one does not mean absolute deregulation. I think we need to make that absolutely clear. What it does mean is that we would remove existing CPD regulations and obligations, and the reason for doing that would be to allow firms and individuals the freedom and flexibility to determine based on their needs and based on their business models as to exactly how they go about ensuring that a competent legal service is delivered. It doesn't mean that there will not be any regulations in place in relation to ensuring quality legal services from the context of continuing professional development, because the existing provisions in the Code of Conduct and the Handbook would still remain, and we would still hold individuals and firms to account in terms of whether or not they met those particular obligations. How we would pick up on those issues is really the point I made in one of the earlier slides. Is we would pretty much use our existing risk-based framework to pick up on any emerging risks. We would use our supervision function, working with firms that fall within our supervisory umbrella, to try and identify and to try and spot perhaps where a firm had not paid due regard, or an individual paid due regard to those existing regulations that will remain in the Code of Conduct and the Handbook. Okay, again, we're just running through some of the questions, so please bear with us. A number of you are asking questions around whether or not any of these changes in options to CPD will result in a change to the practicing, the fees for practicing certificates. And at this stage, we simply don't know. The consultation is still live, and again, we just need to analyse those responses and look at how we implement whichever option we decide to go with based on the outcome of that consultation and wider stakeholder engagement. A number of you are just asking for clarity on when the consultation closes. The consultation will close on the 2nd of April this year, so there's just over a week to go for you to submit your responses in the ways in which we have identified on the slides today. Okay, we've pretty much covered the key themes that are emerging through your questions. We'll take these questions away. They'll help us inform the policy development process. We will look at providing responses to those questions that we haven't quite covered or haven't had time to do today. If you do have any further thoughts, queries or questions, I'll try and bring up our contact details again. There they are. They should be on the screen now. Helpful arrow there for you. That's our dedicated site into T4T and the work that we're doing. You can contact us at that email address with any thoughts, reflections, further questions, or you can tweet us at our Twitter address there, which is at @SRA_T4T. that brings us to the end of the webinar. We hope you found it useful. We hope you now, for those that haven't read the consultation, hopefully now have a much clearer picture of what we're proposing in terms of our options and what is involved in each of those options. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to come and listen to us, and we hope you found it useful. Thank you very much.